Objective 2, demonstrate knowledge of principles and evidence-based instructional practices for developing beginning reading skills, including phonics, high-frequency words, and spelling. So now we're going to move on from those emergent pre-reading skills where we're learning letter names and book skills, and now we're going to start to practice letter sound correspondence. And I like to keep this quote in mind, because I think this quote from Mark Seidenberg does a great job summing up what should be in the goal of the students at this stage of development here. The beginning reader's initial task is to learn how the spoken language they know relates to the written code they are learning. Again, that's the language comprehension and this new written code, the new orthography, and making those connections. That's what we're focused on here in this objective, and that's what these early readers are starting to do. Just to put a name to this, we'll remind you from objective 1, the alphabetic principle, letters have corresponding sounds and vice versa. Sounds have corresponding letters. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now let's talk about phonics. What is phonics? Phonics is simply instruction of the alphabetic principle. All phonics is, and we have to get really clear in differentiating this between phonological and phonemic awareness. Phonics is use of text. Okay? Phonemic and phonological awareness, no text. Phonics is the study of connecting those phonemes that we've been talking about to now graphemes or letters, connecting the sounds to the text. So if you want to say what simply phonics is, it's instruction of the alphabetic principle. So the skill that the students practice during phonics, because phonics is what we call the instruction. So what's the skill the students are doing? That's decoding. So when a student is looking at a word and they're trying to convert those letter sounds or the whole word all at once from print to speech, we say the student is decoding. They're trying to decode. Now, what makes different reading, just simply reading from decoding, is that we would like to say when students read, they're understanding what they read, which of course is reading comprehension. So we can say a student can decode a word beautifully and decode a sentence beautifully and not understand what it means. And so that's a little, we want to kind of have a word to separate reading and reading comprehension from being able to sound out, which is decoding. All right, Linnea Airy has developed these phases of word recognition to take a look at give sort of a way to identify stages that students go through. Of course, there's all blurred lines between these phases, but the test the MTEL does reference these phrases, so I wanted to at least expose you to these phrases because you'll see some of these in questions for the test. So that stuff that we're talking about in objective 1, where students are working on those things, we're going to call that pre-alphabetic phase, where students are they're not really reading, right? It's really quite pre-reading. It's that students can be bringing in a lot of information from the text or making guesses, or they'll do a lot of echo reading, where the parents will, or an adult or a reader will read the page and the student will pay attention, and then they will keep those words in their working memory and they can parrot the words back to you. And it kind of, if you just walked into the room at that moment, it sort of looks like they were reading, but they're not really reading. They just memorized it from what was being said previously, even though it can kind of sneakily look like reading. We call that the pre-alphabetic phase. Partial alphabetic phase is what we want students to start to transition. And now this is where we're going to start to do that phonics instruction so that the students can practice their decoding skill. They're going to start to teach letter sound correspondence. Now, by the time the students get most of those patterns, they are pretty accurate and pretty fluent in recognizing most of the common patterns. There's irregular patterns that we'll talk about in a minute that would kind of get separated out from this. We would call this the full alphabetic phase. So when students got all of the basic letters and their most common sounds, plus long vowel sounds, and maybe a couple other common spelling patterns that we'll go over in a minute, we would call that full alphabetic. Uh, Consolidated alphabetic phase is when students aren't relying on decoding each individual sound. They start to see bigger chunks, right? So a common one that we'll do in like kindergarten, right, is we'll just teach ing is ing, right? We're not going to have students be doing separating out, or we don't want students to be decoding ing every time because the ing suffix is so common that their students are going to start to see chunks of words like that, like ing, and they'll be able to read it. They'll be able to recognize it at the end of the word, and they'll be able to see, oh yeah, that's a chunk that says ing, and they won't need to decode it every time. So we might start to call that a consolidated alphabetic phase. And the last phase is automatic, where students are just fluent, proficient readers. And, we're hoping to get, well, we don't need to put a grade to it because the MTEL doesn't, but we're hoping kids move through this early reading period to get to automatic. So you will see the point of saying all this is that you will see questions that reference things like partial alphabetic phase, full alphabetic phase, um, etc. And most of the time, those phrases or those labels, partial alphabetic, full alphabetic phrases, are not necessary information for the question, but the test certainly recognizes them. So there might be a future question that I don't know about that where it would be necessary information. So that's what I'm going to show you. But most of the questions, practice questions I see that references them, you don't need to know that the student is identified as partial alphabetic to answer the question. It's not a necessary piece of information. Again, just to bring it back to objective one in the brain, the big picture here. Phonics, when students are moving through, remember they see the text down here in the orthographic processor, and they're going to first try to make a connection in the phonological processor between the text they're seeing, those graphemes, and the sounds that they've heard or they've memorized. And so instructing them explicitly on making those connections is phonics, right? So basically this pathway is the phonics pathway, where we're teaching them those individual letter sound correspondences. Now, remember, they need the phonemic awareness out here to blend it back together once they've picked out all the sounds. But this first part right here is what we get from phonics when we're talking about reading. Like I said before, eventually students will slowly phase this out over repetitions for a given stimuli, a given word, and then they will just fluently move from orthographic to meaning without needing to sound out words anymore. Okay, so how do we teach it? Right, we're going to start with those letter sound correspondences. We're going to start with a big picture card, a big alphabet on a board, and we're going to teach basic letter sounds. We're going to teach A, apple, A. We're going to teach B, B. We're going to teach C, etc., etc. And we're going to do those for all the letter sounds. Uh, I was kind of referencing this in the first video, but a lot of schools are starting to do this instruction at the same time as letter names. Um, so you might not see a difference between letter name teaching and letter sound teaching. So we'll start off here. Okay. Once students have a couple letters, they don't have to have all of them, but they have a couple, we're going to start to show them easy words that contain the letter sound or focus heavily on the letter sound correspondences we've taught, right? So if we're gonna, we've taught now we're gonna start to show them a couple words that have and a couple of the consonants we've taught, like t, b, k, etc. And then we're gonna show them cat, bat, tap. And so what we want the student to do is, now that they have those individual letter sounds, is we want them to sound out uh, the word from the text. See, when they see C, see see T, t, and then they have to use that phonemic awareness to blend it back together. Okay, that's tapping it out and blending it back together. We will also teach, we'll talk about the actual syllable types in the next video, and we'll also talk about syllabication in the next video, and we'll talk about strategies for words. But this is sort of, this really covers all of objective 2 and 3 here, the ways we teach it. Okay. So the process for teaching these phonics skills are usually going to follow a multi-component structure that's going to look something like this. I think I have a longer one later too, but it'll be something like you review your previously taught sounds, or you start teaching a new sound. Then you move into explicit instruction of the new skill. So you review old sounds, you teach the new one. Maybe we're teaching X today. We bring that in, and then we build it up. So we start small with old letters, bring in a new sound, then we build it up to word. Okay, now here are words with that. Okay, now here are sentences that give you multiple opportunities to practice that skill. And then we always have to get to the text. We always have to get to some sort of story, because all of this component skill work is all in service ultimately of reading comprehension. You'll definitely hear me say that again when we talk about reading comprehension. But the whole point of all this memorization, all of this drill, all these flashcards, it's all ultimately in service of students understanding the text. So we want to make that as clear as possible to the student, so that we are, yes, you're learning the skill, and here's how it's going to help you understand what you read, because that's the point of reading. That's the value in it. And while we do this, we're also going to do the spelling side of this as well, and we do dictation practice using that. So again, that's when the student's going to need their segmenting skill. We say the words that have these letter sound correspondences, and they need to segment them in their head and then write each grapheme, and that's dictation practice. Here's a much more detailed example of a typical multi-component phonics lesson. This is all in your study guide. I encourage you to look at this, but there's a lot of good references and language and explanation of what an explicit phonics lesson looks like. And I encourage you to look at this because the kind of language that's in here is going to be very helpful to you when you get to especially your essay writing. But I want to highlight here just the thing I was saying before when we put these time estimations in. We're still spending, even though, yes, we're talking about phonics and we're doing this phonics instruction, and this is the new hot thing we've been talking about in this world right now, we don't want to get lost in service of what the phonics instruction's for, and that is here, the longest chunk, 15 to 20 minutes in reading comprehension. Okay? That's where we're going to spend our time, because all of that component skill work is in service of reading comprehension. All right, there is a pretty programs will have different sequences for teaching letters. Some people will have a phonological approach where it's based on the efficiency of letter recognition for reading, including the sound and the shape, right? So if you're doing a phonological approach, then you are teaching the letters with paying attention to the sounds that those letters make, as opposed to an alphabetic approach where you're just teaching the letters in order. You go A, B, C, D, etc., right? A phonological approach is, well, hey, I'm not going to teach A, B, C, D. I want to start with sounds that I know are easy to say for students, like those continuous sounds like and etc. Those sounds are continuous. They tend to be a little bit easier, so I'm going to start with those so we're not having any trouble. Other things that we're going to consider that might show up in the test is, we don't want to teach uh, sounds that are similar right next to each other at the same time. So I don't want to do b and d at the same time, because students will often get those confused. And not only are they getting those sounds confused because they're similar, the orthography, the writing for B and D is also very similar, and students will tend to mix those up as well. So we definitely want to space B and D apart for multiple reasons. Um, we're also going to teach them in terms of frequency or appearance. Here, the slide says usefulness, but really what we mean by that is how frequency they're going to show up. So we're not going to teach the sounds for X and Q and Z first because they're not likely to show up in words, right? This is kind of like Wheel of Fortune rules, right? You want to pick the sounds that show up and the letters that show up most often in words, because what's that going to allow you to do? That's going to allow you to create many words using those frequently appearing words and sounds so that you can create rich and interesting texts, right? So if you use a lot of frequently appearing letters and sounds, then you'll gives you more freedom to create words and practice with those sounds, which will then allow you to create sentences and entirely decodable books using a limited amount of sounds and letters. So you want to introduce those frequently appearing ones first. Blending techniques. Lots of programs will have different words or techniques for doing blending. I can tell you now the test definitely does not care, does not discriminate on which one you're using. However, it would be helpful to you when the test asks you to name an evidence-based practice, if you have one, even if you have one to just write, even if you're not like super solid in using it yourself at this point, you'll get there and then you'll, end up using one. Use whatever one you're comfortable with, but just have an evidence-based practice in blending. Here are 5 examples that if you write them down and claim that they're evidence-based practices, um, the MTEL would, of course, acknowledge that, yes, that is an evidence-based practice for doing a blending technique. The basic one we're going to do is sound it out, right? So you can see up in the top right, we have these letter tiles, and we're going to definitely highlight the vowels for the students because really, we'll get down to this when we talk about syllable types, but the whole point of this for students, once they kind of have the basics, is what does the vowel say? That's the hardest thing to figure out. So we are always going to be paying special attention to the vowel. So we're going to put MAP in front of them with tiles, and we're going to have the students use their fingers, and the points of the M say ah, and they use their blending skills to put it back together. And we can do this here. I encourage you to take these out. You can pause the video right here and just practice either using your finger, tapping down your arm, tapping your chin, whatever you want to do. Just tap the table. Do something to practice tapping out these individual sounds. All right. When we're teaching these sounds, unfortunately, English it's not a totally one-to-one correspondence between all the sounds that we make and the letters that we have. In English, we have sounds that are only available between combinations of letters. An example of that would be the first ones we teach to students, which are consonant digraphs. A consonant digraphs is when we put two consonants together and they make one sound. TH is a consonant. There is no single letter that makes the sound. We have the combination TH, which is a consonant digraph, to make the sound. Same with sh. WH, whistle, is also a consonant digraph, although we do have W to make the what sound, but it's kind of that's actually an interesting linguistic evolution. We used to actually pronounce WH as wh, and it would like, whistle instead of whistle. But we phased that out, and now WH just says wh, just like a W does. But we've kept the spelling to go along with it, even though we stopped pronouncing it like that. CH is also an example of a digraph. Yeah. So digraphs, two consonants that make one sound. Of course, we can then bump this up to three and make a consonant trigraph. Of course, di means two, tri three. We have trigraphs such as TCH in the word catch. TCH is three consonants that come together to make one sound, ch. We also have vowel digraphs, which are two consecutive letters, one of which must be a vowel that make one sound. So a vowel digraph, an example would be OW, ow, right? No single vowel makes the ow sound, but OW can come together and make ow. AW can come together to make aw. OA can come together to make o. AW, aw, and OA. O, of course, can be represented by just single vowels, but these cases, we have letter combinations for them. Uh, OO in food, OO oo, is an example of a vowel digraph that is not possibly made by another vowel sound. And then OO ook, OO that's kind of the thing about these letter combinations is, accent kind of it starts to creep in its head, and we're not going to have the full accent conversation here because the MTEL does not worry about it, does not acknowledge it, and does not get into that level of detail. So I won't in this webinar either. But if you see me, I have to think a little bit about exactly because these things can kind of blend and move, and there's sometimes just lack of clarity. But what you do need to know is that there are things called vowel digraphs, and they are two letters, one of which is a vowel, that make one sound. Now, a kind of vowel digraph could be a vowel team, which are pairs of vowel letters that represent a phoneme that's already associated with a common vowel sound, right? So EE says E. We already have a long E that makes an E sound. AI in maid says A. Of course, long A serves the same purpose, but in the word maid, we use AI, and so on for all of those vowel teams, right? Vowel teams are going to be a kind of vowel digraph that's two consecutive vowel letters. Lastly, we have vowel diphthongs, which are two consecutive vowels that make a unique sound, right? So that's not represented. So vowel diphthong is a kind of vowel digraph that makes a vowel sound that isn't available in our current letters, right? So we have O, I, oi is a vowel diphthong because oi is not made by any of our other vowels. So vowel digraphs are two consecutive letters that make one sound. A kind of vowel digraph is a vowel team, and a kind of vowel digraph is a vowel diphthong as well. R-controlled vowels. When a vowel is, just because of our mouth formation, when a vowel is followed by the letter R, they tend to glide together. There becomes a little bit of distortion in the vowel, and they make a sound that is quite distinct that students will hear. And it's distinct enough that it's helpful to call it a different thing. And that's all of these categorizations, right? They're all kind of they're not hard and fast. English wasn't created with these combinations in mind, and then the language emerged. These are all sort of things that we've had to apply after the fact to make sense of it. And R controlled makes it very obvious that that's the case. So AR, R, OR, or, UR, IR, ER, those are all R controlled vowel sounds. So again, it's a vowel plus an R causes a distortion, and we get those R controlled sounds. Um, we also have a little bit of distortion when we have L controlled. Some programs, phonics programs we run into, will acknowledge or emphasize this, and some won't because depending on your regional accent, this is going to be the distortion's going to be there, or not at all. So the MTEL does recognize L controlled as a vowel sound, but you might not hear it emphasized in other programs. So this is going to be in something like AL and halt. AL becomes all, right? It makes an all sound. If we were to tap out um, halt and just use individual sounds, we would say alt, halt, but we don't say halt. We say halt because that's an L control A and L come together to make an L controlled sound all. Same thing in the word bold. If we were just tapping out bold, we would expect it to be b, ah, old, bald. But we have old because the L distorts the O and it makes an ol sound. Lastly, we have a special kind of sound that does not, it's always hard to figure out where to put this, but we have something called the schwa. Okay. Um, the schwa can be made by any vowel, and it is always going to be it's always going to say an sound, right? And what happens is when we have syllable words, multisyllabic words, there's always going to be an emphasis on one of the syllables in the multisyllabic word. And what happens is when we de-emphasize the other syllables in the multisyllabic words, that will also, again, distort the vowel and we'll say an sound. So this is kind of strange, but let's take some examples. You can have like comma, right? We don't say comma, we say comma because we emphasize the first syllable in comma, com, and then we kind of just, forget the schwa. The A becomes the schwa in that word and we ignore it. With family, right? We don't say family, we say family. And when we say family, that I is the schwa in that word. It's a de-emphasized vowel sound. And so in family, I says Same thing in button. Um, button, the first syllable, but is emphasized. Therefore, we don't say button. We say button. And then the O takes on that soft sound, and that's the schwa as well as the in circus. Okay. Schwas are very, very common. They're all over the place. The test will reference the schwa. What you need to know about the schwa is that it's a de-emphasized sound in multisyllabic words. Okay, let's get into some questions. We're breaking up the phonics piece here into chunks. So let's just do 2 questions on this objective, and then we're going to talk a lot more about phonics in the next objective. As you can see that the learning more about the next objective is going to help you answer these questions too. I considered them combining them, but whatever. So here we go. Objective 2. We're following what the test says. The test says this is an objective 2 question. So pause here and we'll come back. The correct answer is D, silent E and R controlled vowels. Okay, so what are the mistakes that the student is making? So let's take a look at this first instance here. Set. Okay, no problem there. Star, stir. Oh, we see that. And where did they make a mistake? They made a mistake with AR. So that is R controlled. Drive, driv. Oh, what did they make a mistake? They made a mistake that with this silent E. Here we have, so we have an R controlled mistake. We have a silent E mistake. Here, E in the word peach, the student wrote PECH for peach. we know that the student made an error in this vowel team. Turn, the student's error is in URAR, so that's an R-controlled error. And again, in join, we have OI was OY. That's very close. Hard to blame them for that one. That's a that's also a vowel team error. Okay, so they made R-controlled error, silent E error, vowel team error, R-controlled error, vowel team error. Now, what did they fix a month later? Okay, set was still good. Oh, look at that. They fixed their R controlled. Oh, look at that. They fixed their silent E. Uh-oh, the vowel team's still wrong. Oh, here we go. The R controlled is now fixed, and oh, the vowel team is still wrong. So we can see in these options, initial and final consonants was never an issue for the student, so that's not correct. Vowel teams are still an issue, so that's not going to be correct. Consonant digraphs and blends were never an issue for the student. The student was getting st, st, those are blends. No problem with those. So the only option was the D, silent D, in our controls. All right. According to the pause here. The correct answer is C, TH. So let's take a look at these other ones. What I was saying before when we were introducing these concepts is they were coming in the order in which you teach them. So when I showed you vowel consonant digraphs, I showed you that first because that is the order in which we would teach them. So that's what you want to introduce first. So TH is definitely the first among these. R controlled and these vowel team sounds, and this is an irregular spelling pattern. These would all come after can, right? The first one that we would teach in terms of phonics is TH